This is our last project, Surrealistic Self-Portrait, and this will be the last technique that we're going to learn on a different support, which in this case will be wood, and in a different technique, which is going to be a kind of modified Venetian style technique. Additionally, we're going to study a couple of artists from the movement known as Surrealism, which started in the early part of the 20th century, lasted until mid-century, and then has enjoyed a resurgence of late in many contemporary artists. The first artist we're going to look at is Helen Lundberg. You'll notice in her paintings that here she quite literally has a self-portrait on the wall. The canvas is divided in an asymmetrical fashion, the left side being slightly larger than the right side. You'll notice that there is subtle modulations of value and tone in the face, the hair, the hand, the flowers, but there's also a lot of flat areas. There's this balance between hard edge, kind of abstraction of geometry, and soft edge, organic qualities in the cloud, in the lake, and in the figure. You'll notice that the overall color scheme is, for the most part, complementary, orange and blue, but there's also a kind of leaning towards yellow and green, which should of course be a kind of analogous pairing. The interesting thing about Helen Lundberg's work in this specific case is the ambiguity. Is this a window or is it a picture? The shadow kind of gives it away as a picture, but her presence seems very real. And then you have this odd hand holding up a flower. You're not sure if it's her hand or if it's another person's hand. It's very mysterious. And then you have this flower that's very intentionally laid across the surface of this ledge. One of the petals is in a budding state, and then you have this other one that's in a fuller grown state. Also interesting is the fact that this flower is facing the self-portrait of the artist, and then of course the artist is looking to the right, so she's not engaging. So this person is offering a flower to someone who doesn't exist, just an image. And then you have this very stark and bleak landscape, which creates an emotional kind of hollowness. Here's a trickier painting. Again, you see that characteristic soft edge in some areas blending, and then these very hard edge forms. This is a playful image, much less serious than the last one. She looks like a typical 1950s housewife. You have this analogous color scheme of blues and blue-greens and yellows, and then over here it gets into a kind of a blue-violet, blue-green color scheme. So there's two sets of analogous color palettes here. Of course, the green is complemented by the red, so there's this red that kind of leads your eye across the canvas. And of course, it's surreal in that not only is the formal quality of the painting kind of ambiguous in its flatness, but you also have her holding a painting or a moon, which of course would be impossible in real life. The other interesting thing is this a window again, or is it another canvas behind this canvas? We're not exactly sure. Frida Kahlo, of course, is one of the most famous of surrealist artists. Frida Kahlo was a very interesting character. She was married to a muralist named Diego Rivera, and they're known for having a tempestuous relationship. Frida's life story is kind of tragic in a lot of ways. She was injured as a young girl and lost mobility for a while, suffered chronic pain for her entire life. But she certainly was a character. Like Salvador Dali had a kind of persona that went along with her work. She is known for kind of a fusion of her heritage, being from Mexico, and often dressing in traditional garments. She often has animals around her, in this case a monkey, and there's a whole series of paintings of her with a monkey. You have her standing in kind of this ambiguous jungle-like space. You're not sure whether it's actually outside or whether it's a pattern, and I think that's mostly because, again, you have this flat quality. There is gradation, but it looks more like wallpaper than it does an actual jungle. So that flattening to create ambiguity and surrealness, otherness, metaphysical instead of physical qualities is a common tactic, it seems. There's another pattern in her dress and another pattern in her hair with this ribbon. Again, you see an analogous color scheme with the greens and the yellow greens and the yellows, and then you have this complement in the ribbon of her hair against that green. Notice that these aren't bright colors, as in the last artist. None of the colors are very intense. There's little pops of color, but predominantly you have dull colors in the backgrounds, muted colors in the skin, with little pops of color in the ribbon and in her dress. Here's a picture of her in a wheelchair. So this would have been during a period of time when she was incapacitated. You'll see on the right a picture of her father on the easel. Again, you see this very stark landscape. Her shape is flat. She's holding the tools of an artist, a palette and brushes, but instead of paint, you see a heart. So this juxtaposition of strange imagery is characteristic of the Surrealist movement. You'll notice that she's wearing, again, a kind of traditional outfit. She looks very elegant, and she is kind of surrounded by this very dramatic linear perspective. Again, it's kind of a room that's devoid of character, though. There is subtle gradations of tone, subtle textures, as you can see in the walls and the space around her. But there really is a flattening of her figure, very little gradation, a little bit here on the arm. Her hair is flat. The clothing has some gradation. This figure actually looks more realistic than her figure. Finally, we see her again here, surrounded by foliage. She's not wearing clothing. The foliage is kind of wrapping around her. She has this necklace on that has these primitive-looking god figures. Not sure what they mean, whether they're from Mexican culture, perhaps Aztec or Mayan. So she's constantly referring to her heritage. And speaking of hair, you have this elaborate shape on top of her head. We're not sure whether it's her hair or whether it's a ribbon or some sort of hat. But I could kind of discern that the hair kind of poking out must indicate that her hair is actually wrapped up in this shape. She's looking at the viewer very starkly, very emotionless, and I think you notice that kind of emotionless quality in her face in all of the images. Even though she's surrounded by strangeness, she's reacting in a way that doesn't show a lot of emotion. Here you can see, again, that kind of stylization and abstraction of the foliage in this very flat, subtly modulated background, contextualized against empty spaced, so no indication of landscape or architecture, just nothingness. Okay, our next artist is Remedios Varro. Her works have a much softer feeling than the rest of the artists that we've been looking at, much more luminous, and perhaps a lot more surreal as well, pushing the boundaries into a much more obvious kind of dreamscape territory. I think the one thing that stands out the most is the lack of the flat planes or the geometry. Now, don't get me wrong, there's geometry here, but you'll notice that each plane has a somewhat wavery edge. It doesn't look like she used a ruler, maybe a maul stick, and each plane has a gradation. So you've got this kind of jewel-like faceting of the environment. The model feels like she's trapped in some sort of other dimension. And of course, she's pulling something from the outside and grinding it up into this little dish, which I'm assuming she's using to feed the moon, who is trapped in a bird cage. She feels very haggard, almost tired, so you get the impression that this is kind of a torture for her, or a task, or something that she's eternally doing. So this juxtaposition of the context, the landscape being a character, the figure, of course, being a character, and then these strange, odd objects being characters or symbols, is really what we're seeing as a common thread or link. So again, strange objects and the juxtaposition of strange objects, strange landscapes, and of course emotional figures, either figures with flat emotions, curious emotions, or in this case, emotions of fatigue. Here's another image by Varro, and you can see here there's kind of a musical theme. Again, there's a geometric kind of context with these organic forms set on top. You can see the main actor here playing with these different objects, a rose, an ivy leaf, some sort of beet, a glass pyramid, some mathematical equations, a shell, a diamond, maybe a piece of fruit, or another flower, all kind of emanating from this musical staff, the treble clef. It's almost like an abacus as well, so there's this kind of reinforcement of magic, math, and music. That looks like an egg now that I'm noticing it. This winds up, so there's some sort of mechanical quality to it. You can see these books on a mostly empty bookshelf, and then what looks like a bed up here with a ladder that's much too small for this figure to climb up. Now you could argue that it's far away, but if you think about the proximity of the corner of the room to the figure, the value contrast, the lack of atmospheric perspective, to me it looks more like it's squirrel size or cat size than it does human size. And then of course you have this figure breaking through the wall, kind of an angelic figure or a ghostly figure, definitely not as corporal as this figure, so very immaterial and metaphysical. So this straddling of the borders between the real and the unreal is something that typifies surrealism. Next we move on to Leonora Carrington. You can see yet again the pattern that I think I'm trying to set. Here we're returning to this strange geometry, very evocative landscape. There is repetition happening here with the horse, both the rocking horse and the real horse. Of course, placing the rocking horse in the air is a twist on reality. this kind of hybrid of a pregnant hyena and a horse form is also quite strange. It has human features, so that adds to the surreal quality. She herself almost seems to be floating, weightless, and obviously that's enhanced by this floating unicorn, or sorry, horse, rocking horse. Is it attached to her head? Is it coming out of the back of the couch, or is it just floating in the air? I also think that this is kind of an interesting touch. The curtain, very bright, gold. It's very theatrical in its insinuation, like there's a stage back here, or perhaps it's a portal from one world into another world. Again, I just want to flip back and indicate to you that there's this kind of overall gray tonality, brown, reddish brown, bluish grays, and then you have these pops of color. Moderate intensity, high intensity, moderate intensity, variations of blue-green and yellow-green, this intense white here, this intense white here, this dullish white here. Notice that even in the flat walls, there's just ever so slightly a variation. And again, if we look back at some of these images by Varos, you'll notice again that there's really no intense color here at all. It's all in the muted spectrum. You can identify reddish, bluish, greenish, orangish, bluish, yellowish, but definitely, some dulling with complementary mixtures. Same thing here. Dull, 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 moderate intensity. Notice how she doesn't get into the really intense colors. If we go back to Lenora Carrington, you can see much more intensity in her colors versus Frida Kahlo, more intensity. Very intense set of colors here. And I'd say more intense colors in Helen Lindeberg too. Here's another one by Carrington. You can see that kind of balance of gray and moderate intensity colors, and then you have these brighter blues and greens. Look at this yellow green back here versus this blue green here. Look at this strange pop of color. Notice how she's got this very interesting gown on that turns into a fishtail, and then you have this very evocative winter landscape that she's walking through. And yeah, that sock. Also notice the repetition of a theme. Here's another horse, and here's a horse, and that seems to be like a almost spirit animal expression for her. Dorothea Tanning, another. She, like Kylo, does a lot of kind of close-in self-portraits. So this is less about, the context like we see in Varos or Carrington. Tanning has a much more close-up view, no background. An interesting headdress made out of pine boughs, and then these red fabrics and fibers that seem to be constricting her and tying her up. Here's a interior space by her, much more naturalistic. There's geometry there, but it's very naturalistic, down to the shadows, the grain of the wood, the reflection. You've got this kind of endless hallway to nowhere. You've got her wearing this very regal-looking purple and gold shirt, and then you have these roots of a plant that make up part of this dress. She's barefoot, of course bare-chested, and she has this kind of monkey-griffin hybrid in front of her. So again, really what this project is about and to just nutshell it, it's about a strange environment, either inside or outside, It's about a self-portrait, either a full body or partial body. Um, that self-portrait needs to have an emotional quality in the face or in the gestures of the body. And of course, the figure needs to be wearing something strange or odd. You could use animals or objects as symbols, but really everything is in symbolic relief here. It's all about poetry. You don't have to think real hard about it. Just pick the first things that come to your mind. Let your subconscious take over. So by Monday, I want you to have a sketchbook sketch, a value study. That means a full finished drawing of your idea. So I want that by Monday before the beginning of class, and I want it to be uploaded to the discussion group as we usually do. Make sure you title it Value Study and Surrealistic Self-Portrait with your name, medium. Whether you use pen or pencil or charcoal is up to you. And of course, the fact that it's in a 9 by 12 inch format because it's from your sketchbook. And we will discuss those on Monday. And on Monday, I will introduce your first project. Again, I'm going to be there in the classroom on Monday. If you don't have your panel from today is Friday, pick it up Monday. Come by during class and I'll give it to you. If you want to stay in class, we can do that. We have plenty of room, so it's up to you. This is our last project, so we might as well kind of change it up a bit. So let me know if you have any questions over the weekend.